In a small village surrounded by dark, thick forests, lived a young boy named Jake. Jake was 10 years old, with bright green eyes and a head full of messy black hair. His mother had married a man named Greg, who became Jake's stepfather. Greg seemed nice at first, but there was something about him that made Jake uneasy. Greg was a tall man with sharp features and a bushy beard. He often disappeared into the woods at night, saying he needed to check on things. Jake didn't know what that meant, but he never asked. He was too scared. One night, Jake was in bed, trying to sleep, when he heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like growling. Curious and a little frightened, Jake got out of bed and tiptoed to his window. Peeking through the curtains, he saw Greg standing at the edge of the forest. The moon was full, and its light made everything look eerie. Suddenly, Greg began to change. His body twisted and contorted, his clothes ripping apart. Hair sprouted all over him, and his face elongated into a snout. Within moments, Greg was no longer a man. He was a werewolf. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe his eyes. His stepfather was a monster. The werewolf let out a terrifying howl that echoed through the village. Jake quickly closed the curtains and backed away from the window. He wanted to run to his mother, but he was too scared to move. The next morning, Greg was back to his normal self, acting as if nothing had happened. Jake watched him closely, noticing the tired look in his eyes and the scratches on his arms. He wanted to tell his mother, but he knew she wouldn't believe him. Greg was very convincing and always had an excuse. Days turned into weeks, and every full moon, Jake would watch Greg transform and disappear into the forest. Each time, Jake's fear grew. He started having nightmares about werewolves chasing him, their glowing eyes and sharp teeth haunting his dreams. One evening, as the full moon rose, Jake decided he couldn't stay silent any longer. He had to protect his mother. He waited until Greg left the house and then ran to find his mother in the kitchen. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. His mother looked up from her cooking, concerned. "What is it, Jake?" "It's Greg. He's a werewolf," Jake blurted out. "I've seen him change. He goes into the forest every full moon." His mother stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and worry. "Jake, that's a very serious accusation. You've been having nightmares, maybe you're just imagining things." Jake shook his head vigorously. "No, Mom, I'm telling the truth. Please, you have to believe me." Before his mother could respond, they heard a loud crash outside. The color drained from her face. "Stay here, Jake," she said firmly, grabbing a flashlight and heading for the door. "Mom, no, it's not safe," Jake cried, but she was already out the door. Jake felt a surge of panic. He couldn't let his mother face Greg alone. He grabbed a kitchen knife and followed her into the night. The full moon cast long shadows across the yard. Jake could hear growling and the sound of something moving through the bushes. He found his mother standing at the edge of the forest, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. "Mom, we have to go back inside," Jake whispered urgently. Just then, a massive figure stepped out from the trees. It was Greg, but in his werewolf form. His eyes glowed with a sinister light, and his teeth gleamed in the moonlight. He growled, advancing towards them. Jake's mother gasped, dropping the flashlight. "Greg," she whispered in shock. The werewolf lunged at them, and Jake reacted without thinking. He shoved his mother out of the way and held up the knife, ready to defend them. The werewolf snarled, swiping at Jake with its massive claws. Jake felt a sharp pain in his arm as the claws raked across his skin. "Run, Mom," Jake screamed. His mother hesitated, but then she turned and ran back to the house. Jake tried to follow, but the werewolf was too fast. It tackled him to the ground, its hot breath on his face. Just as Jake thought it was the end, a loud bang echoed through the air. The werewolf howled in pain and stumbled backward. Jake's mother stood at the edge of the yard, holding a shotgun. She fired again, and the werewolf collapsed, its body twitching before going still. Jake's mother ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jake nodded, wincing from the pain in his arm. "I'm okay, Mom, thanks to you." They looked at Greg's lifeless body, now back in human form. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Jake and his mother moved away from the village, leaving the dark memories behind. They found a new home in a different town, where the forests were not as thick, and the nights were not as dark. But Jake never forgot what happened. He knew there were real monsters in the world, and they could be closer than anyone imagined.